أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه فجعلناه سميعا بصيرا إنا هديناه السبيل إما شاكرا وإما كفورا إنا أعتدنا للكافرين سلاسل وغلالا وسعيرا إن الأبرار يشربون من كأس كان مزاجها كافورا عينا يشرب بها عباد الله يفجرونها تفجيرا يوفون بالنذر ويخافون يوما كان شره مستتيرا ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما واسيرا إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا إنا نخاف من ربنا يوما عبوسا قمطريرا فوقاهم الله شر ذلك اليوم ولقاهم نضرة وسرورا وجزاهم بما صبروا جنة وهريرا متقين فيها على الأرائك لا يرون فيها شمسا ولا زمهريرا صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات.
بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین پتہ چلے نہ یہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین. بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین پتہ چلے نہ یہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین. جو میرا فرض تھا اماں ادا کیا میں نے زمیں پہ لاشائے اصغر چھپا دیا میں نے جوان بیٹے کا لاشا اٹھا لیا میں نے میں اب بھی پیاسا ہوں پانی نہیں پیا میں نے بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین پتہ چلے نہ یہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے غموں سے بائی کی ٹوٹی ہوئی ہے میری کمر، جگر سے اکبر مہرو کا کٹ رہا ہے جگر، خدا کا شکر ادا کر رہا ہوں لاشوں پر، نہ روئے آپ بہت مطمئن ہوں میں مادر، بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین، پتہ چلے نہ یہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین، پتہ چلے نہ یہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین، میری ہی گود میں بچہ میرا ہوا بے جان، جگر سے اپنے جواں کی نکالی میں نے سینہ، گلے پہ خند جو خنجر یہ ہو رہا ہے رواں، بس آخری یہ میرا امتحان ہے مادر، بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین، پتہ چلے نہ یہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین، زمین سکیے راز کوئی بات نہیں، مدد نہیں مدد کو کوئی پاس کوئی بات نہیں، ہوئی نہ ختم میری پیاس کوئی بات نہیں، خدا کو دے دیا عباس کوئی بات نہیں، بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین، پتہ چلے نہ یہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین، نکل کے قبر سے نانا میری طرف ہے رواں، یہ دیکھو اماں کے بابا بھی آ گئے ہیں یہاں، ہے منتظر میرا اس دم خدا کا کون و مقام، سبھی یہ کہتے ہیں شبیر ہے میرا مہمان، بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین، پتہ چلے نہ یہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین، جو میرا قرض تھا اماں ادا کیا میں نے، زمیں پہ لاشائے اصغر چھپا دیا میں نے، جوان بیٹے ٹیکا لاشا اٹھا لیا میں نے، میں اب بھی پیاسا ہوں، پانی نہیں پیا میں نے، بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین، پتہ چلے نہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین۔ قمر یہ کہتے ہوئے مطمئن ہوئے مولا، نکل کے آئے گا غیبت سے جب پسر میرا، وہ اپنے ساتھ میری ذوالفقار لائے گا، وہ لے گا کربلا اور شام کا بدلہ، بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین، پتہ چلے نہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین، بہت سکون سے خدا کی طرف چلا ہے حسین، پتہ چلے نہ ماں کو تڑپ رہا ہے حسین، بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔
بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔ Brothers and sisters, my elders, Assalamu alaikum. We invite all of you to join us tomorrow at 7:30 for part 2 of our series about Palestine. We had one last month, I believe, and then this is the second part. This time, we are honored to have Sister Itra Sayed lead an important conversation about activists, BDS, media, and beyond. This session is open to all men and women, and no registration is required. The program will start at 7:30 tomorrow with some refreshments, followed by the discussion with Sister Itra Sayed and Brother Mustafa Dewji. Inshallah, and there'll be also a Q&A session to complete the program. Salawat. Brothers and sisters, if I can ask you to recite 3 loudest salawat to welcome Sheikh Azhar Nasser. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Before we begin the lecture for tonight, just a few minutes on some of the ahkam and the risala amaliya of Sayyid al-Sistani. As we've been discussing, Sayyid al-Sistani has organized his risala amaliya, where first he discusses some issues relating to taqleed, and then he has a chapter dedicated to the wajibat and the muharramat. After listing the wajibat, the obligatory acts, he makes a list of some of the most dangerous of sins, the major sins. And among the sins that he mentions, number 5 on the list is قتل المسلم بل كل محقون الدم. It is a sin to kill another Muslim, or in fact, any human being whose blood is protected. وكذلك التعدي عليه. It's also forbidden to commit any act of aggression against another Muslim. بجرح أو ضرب أو غير ذلك. It's haram to wound another Muslim. It is haram to injure another Muslim. In fact, it is haram to even verbally abuse another Muslim. ويلحق بالقتل. In addition to the prohibition of killing a Muslim, this prohibition also extends to a fetus. ويلحق بالقتل إسقاط الجنين قبل ولوج الروح فيه. It is haram to terminate a pregnancy. So for example, before the soul enters, before ensoulment, which is at 4 months after conception, to terminate a pregnancy before the 4-month period is also haram, unless there is a reason for it, like saving the life of the mother. So even if there is a small clot in the womb, even if it's not a fully developed fetus, doing such would be considered and would constitute murder. Now I want to end with a verse in the Quran. There's a famous ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the punishment for intentionally killing another believer. If you look at Surah An-Nisa, verse 93, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَمَنْ يَقْتُلْ مُؤْمِنًا مُتَعَمِّدًا فَجَزَاؤُهُ جَهَنَّمَ خَالِدًا فِيهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever intentionally kills a believer, their punishment is to be eternally in the hellfire. وَغَضِبَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَلَعَنَهُ وَعَدَّ لَهُ عَذَابًا عَظِيمًا. Now, when you read this verse, what you understand, at least at first glance, is that if anyone intentionally kills a mu'min, there's no chance for tawbah. They go to hell eternally. However, Imam Al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when he was asked, because the Quran tells us that all sins on the Day of Judgment are forgivable except for shirk. But we have this ayah where Allah says, وَمَنْ يَقْتُلْ مُؤْمِنًا مُتَعَمِّدًا فَجَزَاؤُهُ جَهَنَّمَ خَالِدًا فِيهَا. Imam Al-Sadiq, he explains what this verse means. what type of intentional murder will lead a person to eternal punishment. Imam al-Sadiq, he says, explaining this ayah, قال من قتل مؤمنا على دينه فذلك المتعمد الذي قال الله عز وجل وعد له عذابا عظيما. Imam al-Sadiq, he says, this verse is speaking about the one who intentionally kills a mu'min because of their faith. To kill someone because of their iman, that is the type of murder that is unforgivable. And that is the type of murder that will lead a person to be punished eternally in the hellfire. So the questioner, he asks Imam al-Sadiq, what if there's an argument and a fight that breaks out between two mu'mineen, and one of them, in a fit of rage, he kills another mu'min? Imam al-Sadiq says that is not the type of murder that the ayah is speaking about. So the verse speaks about the intentional killing of a mu'min because of their faith. وَصَلُّوا عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِ مُحَمَّدٍ. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the opportunity to congregate on this blessed night, a night that coincides with the shahada of our beloved 10th Imam, Imam Ali al-Hadi, salawatullahi alayhi. When you look at the Quran, there are many verses that speak about the qualities that an imam must possess for them to be qualified for this position. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah As-Sajdah, ayah 24, He says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ, and we made from among them. And the previous ayah was speaking about Bani Israel. Bani Israel, they are a blessed nation of prophets, of imams. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا وَكَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يُوقِنُونَ. From this verse, we can derive a number of important lessons. Number one is the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He speaks about imam, when He speaks about divine leadership, He highlights and underscores that this position is something that is designated by Allah. وَجَعَلْنَا, and we made from among them imams. We made from among them. This was not a decision that was left for the people. It was not through a democratic process. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً. What is the role, what is the function of these divinely appointed leaders? These imams, يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. They guide by our command. يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا. The main function of an imam is to guide people towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not just yahdun, yahduna bi-amrina. They are, number one, authorized by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide. They are endorsed and commissioned by Allah azza wa jal. Imam Sadiq, when he comments on this section of the ayah, he says, La bi-amrin nas. They don't guide people by the command of other people. Meaning they were not commissioned or hired by a specific group to guide and to teach the masses. يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا يُقَدِّمُونَ أَمْرَ اللَّهِ قَبْلَ أَمْرِهِمْ. They always give priority to the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the whims and the inclinations of the people. يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِ اللَّهِ. And then Allah mentions two important qualities of an imam. يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا. An imam has to have patience. An imam has to be at the pinnacle of patience. There cannot be someone who is more patient and steadfast than the imam. Because naturally, when you are in a position of guiding others, you're going to face a lot of pushback. You're going to have people who oppose you. So a person who is in a position where they are to guide others, naturally they have to exhibit this quality of patience. يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا وَكَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يُوقِنُونَ. They have to have patience in order to persevere, to withstand the challenges and the obstacles that lie ahead. And equally important, they have to have yaqeen. They have to have certainty. They cannot be doubtful about anything. In order for them to fulfill this role, they have to have yaqeen. And this is what we see with Amir al-Mu'mineen salawatullahi alayhi. Amir al-Mu'mineen, he's the only one among the companions of the Prophet who never experienced a moment of doubt in Islam or in the messengerhood of the Prophet. In fact, if you look at the seerah, many of the Sahaba, they doubted the Prophet, especially on the day of Hudaybiyah, when he signed a peace agreement with Quraysh. Some of the most prominent companions doubted him. They doubted that he was a messenger of God because his decision did not align with their desires. They doubted him. Whereas with Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, Imam, he famously said, لو كشف لي الغطاء مزددت يقينا. Imam, he says, if the curtain of the unseen was lifted, I would not increase in certainty. And all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they had this certainty, they had this yaqeen. Now, when it comes to Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, the Imam, in the short life that he lived for about 42 years, the Imam alayhi salam, despite the severity of the circumstances, he continued in this role as the guide for all Muslims. There's an interesting narration where one of the companions of Imam al-Hadi by the name of Ibn al-Sakit. Ibn al-Sakit was a master of literature. He was an expert on the Arabic language, so much so that al-Mutawakkil al-Abbasi hired him to train and mentor his own sons. Now, Ibn al-Sakit hid for a long time. He was able to hide and conceal the fact that he was a follower of the Ahlul Bayt. After a number of years with the sons of Mutawakkil, Mutawakkil saw that his sons were very fond of their teacher, Ibn al-Sakit, to the extent that the sons of Mutawakkil would kiss the feet of Ibn al-Sakit. You know, that's what a prolific scholar he was. That's how much they loved him and revered him. So when Mutawakkil saw the love that his sons had for Ibn al-Sakit, and he discovered eventually that Ibn al-Sakit was a Shia. So Mutawakkil, he asked Ibn al-Sakit, he says to him, هل أبناي هذان أفضل أم الحسن والحسين? Because Ibn al-Sakit praised the sons of Mutawakkil. So Mutawakkil is now asking Ibn al-Sakit, who's better, my sons or Hassan and Hussein? Now Ibn al-Sakit, it seems that this question enraged him. He was able to conceal his tashayyu', but after he heard this question, he was no longer able to contain himself. The narration says, he says to Mutawakkil, a tyrant, a despot like Mutawakkil, the narration says, فَغَضِبَ ibn السِّكِيتِ Ibn السِّكِيتِ became angry. And he said to him, وَاللَّهِ إِنَّ قَنْبَرًا خَادِمَ عَلِي ibn Abi Talib خَيْرٌ مِنْكَ وَمِنْ وَلَدَيْكَ. Ibn al-Sakit, he says, forget about Hassan and Hussein. He says, Qambar, the servant of Ali ibn Abi Talib, is better than you and your sons. What happened to Ibn al-Sakit? The narration says, فَأَمَرَ الْمُتَوَكِّلُ حَرَسَهُ مِنَ الْأَتْرَاكِ أَنْ يَسْتَلُّوا لِسَانَهُ. Mutawakkil ordered his guards to pull out the tongue of Ibn al-Sakit. They removed his tongue. And he was actually martyred in the month of Rajab. Now I mention this, brothers and sisters, because it's important for us to understand, and I've mentioned this time and time again. It's people like this who preserved the school of Ahlul Bayt. Shi'ism would have been lost if it wasn't for the noble stands of these individuals. A lot of blood was sacrificed for the fiqh of Ja'far al-Sadiq to reach us. A lot of blood was shed for the teachings of Amir al-Mu'mineen to survive these generations. Now this individual, Ibn al-Sakit, he was a contemporary of Imam al-Jawad and Imam al-Hadi. And he was one of the great scholars of Islam, and he once came to Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, and he asked him an important theological question about the nature of miracles. Now we know in Islamic theology, for an individual to prove that they are indeed a true prophet, they have to produce a mu'jiza. They have to produce a miracle. Because anyone can claim to be a prophet. Throughout history, there have been many claimants to prophethood. So the way that we distinguish a false prophet from a true prophet is through the performance of a miracle, a supernatural act that cannot be replicated by anyone. Meaning this individual is claiming to be a prophet, and they couple their claim to nubuwwah with a miracle. Now, every prophet that was sent produced a miracle. But the miracles that were produced are not the same. And Ibn al-Sakit, he goes to Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, and he asks the Imam about the differences in the miracles of the prophets. So the hadith says, قال ابن السكيت لأبي الحسن عليه السلام. Abu al-Hasan is the kunya of Imam al-Hadi. He says, لماذا بعث الله موسى بالعصا واليد البيضاء وآلة السحر. Ibn al-Sakit, he says to Imam al-Hadi, why did Allah send Musa with the staff that would turn into a serpent? And why did he empower him by making his hand glow, al-yad al-bayda? And why did he give them the power to counter the magic of the magicians? Of all the miracles that he could have given Musa, why did he give him those specific miracles? وَلِمَاذَا بَعَثَ اللَّهُ عِيسَى بِآلَةِ الطِّبِّ. And why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send Isa with the miracle of treating the ill? He gave him the miracle of medicine. وَلِمَاذَا بَعَثَ اللَّهُ مُحَمَّدًا صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَآلِهِ وبعث الله محمد صلى الله عليه وآله على جميع الأنبياء بالكلام والخطب. Why is it that the miracle that was given to the Prophet was eloquent speech and oratory. So Ibn Sakit mentions 3 prophets that were given different types of miracles. Why wasn't Isa given the staff? And why wasn't Musa given the ability to heal, those that had leprosy and cure the blind and so on? Why wasn't Musa given the miracle of eloquent speech and oratory? Now, Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, he answers. He says, فقال أبو الحسن عليه السلام إن الله لما بعث موسى عليه السلام كان الغالب على أهل عصره السحر. The miracles that Allah gives to prophets are not arbitrary. They're given to them for specific reasons. They are appropriate for their times. Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, he says that when Allah sent Musa and equipped him with the miracles to counter magic, he did so because during the time of Musa, sorcery ruled supreme. The most powerful people in ancient Egyptian society were who? The magicians. That's why when Musa alayhi salam confronted Fir'aun, Fir'aun summoned the sorcerers to confront Musa. So sorcery and magic ruled and dominated the minds and the hearts of the people. فَأَتَاهُم مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ بِمَا لَمْ يَكُنْ فِي وُسْعِهِمْ مِثْلُهُ. So Musa came with something from Allah, the likes of which could not be produced by others. وَمَا أَبْطَلَ بِهِ سِحْرَهُمْ وَأَثْبَتَ بِهِ الْحُجَّةَ عَلَيْهِمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave Musa the ability to counter the magic of the magicians. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave Musa something that was above sorcery. Meaning that when Musa alayhi salam cast down his staff, it was understood by all that Musa is not a magician. Even the magicians themselves, they recognized that what Musa is producing is not magic because they know magic. They understand the science of magic. In fact, when Musa cast down his staff, it consumed the ropes that they made move because they filled their ropes with mercury. And when the sun struck the mercury, it created the illusion of movement. It consumed all of their ropes. And the magicians ran away when they saw this massive serpent. And do you know who also ran with them? Musa. So when they saw Musa running away with them, they realized that this is not magic. This is something that has been given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is why during the time of Musa, this particular mu'jiza was given to him. The hadith then says, Imam then explains, وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بَعَثَ عِيسَى عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ فِي وَقْتٍ قَدْ ظَهَرَتْ فِيهِ الزَّمَانَاتِ. During the time of Isa, it was a time in which there were illnesses. Illnesses and diseases were epidemic. Because of the spread of disease, the most important people in society during the time of Isa were who? Physicians, the doctors. Now Isa alayhi salam, he was able, according to the Quran and according to the hadith says, وَاحْتَاجَ النَّاسُ إِلَى الطِّبِّ. People were desperate for medicine and treatment during the time of Isa. فَأَتَاهُم مِّنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ بِمَا لَمْ يَكُنْ عِنْدَهُمْ مِثْلُهُ. So Isa alayhi salam, he came and he brought something from Allah, the likes of which that none other could produce. وَبِمَا أَحْيَا لَهُمُ الْمَوْتَى. Isa alayhi salam was able to revive the dead. وَأَبْرَهَ الْأَكْمَهَ وَالْأَبْرَص. He was able to cure the blind and heal the leprous. Now I remember a few years ago, a young man came to me and he said that, Shaykh, this is not a mu'jiza. Today, modern medicine is also able to cure those who are blind and cure people who have leprosy. So how is this a mu'jiza? The reason why it's a mu'jiza is that, yes, today they might be able to restore the vision of someone who's become blind in certain situations, but Isa alayhi salam is not using surgical tools. Isa ibn Maryam is wiping his hand over someone who's blind. Isa ibn Maryam is not giving prescriptions to people and say, you have this illness, take this 3 times a day for a few weeks. Isa ibn Maryam is literally touching people, and through his touch, they are healed. Isa ibn Maryam, when he goes to the cemetery, he's looking at a grave and he says, Qum, and the person gets out of the grave. This is not something that can be reproduced or replicated. So because during the time of Isa, diseases were epidemic and physicians were the most important, he produces something that the elites of that society are not able to replicate. And then Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, he says about the time of the Prophet, وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ بَعَثَ مُحَمَّدًا عليه وآله صلى الله عليه وآله في وقت كان الغالب على أهل عصره الخطب والكلام. When the Prophet صلى الله عليه وآله was sent, he was sent at a time in which eloquent speech and poetry and oratory had reached its climax. And we see this even when we study the battles of Islam. What usually happens before the commencement of a battle? This person comes forward and they introduce themselves through poetry. In fact, when you look at the Arabs in the pre-Islamic era, during the pre-Islamic period, if they weren't fighting with each other, they were reciting poetry. It was the only thing to do. When you're in a desert, they don't have any skyscrapers, there's nothing. So when you live in this large sandbox known as the Arabian desert, you have to develop an imagination. And because Arabia was not colonized and invaded by neighboring empires, what happens is that the Arabic language was very pure. You see, language gets corrupted and it gets diluted when people have to interact with non-native speakers. So because the Arabs enjoyed this unique isolation, their language became very refined. So much so, when the Prophet, who was not known to be someone who reads or writes, when he was able to produce and bring forward the Quran, even the most eloquent of the time, like al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, who was known as the public intellectual of his time, he was not able to produce something that could match the linguistic beauty of the Quran. In fact, the Arab Quraysh knew that this Quran was something extraordinary. Why? Because they used to call the Prophet a magician. Even this accusation that the Quran, that the Prophet is a magician, is an admission that the words of the Quran are extraordinary. Why else would you call him a magician unless you're admitting that the Quran is something that is beyond anything that we can produce? Now, not only is the Quran linguistically exquisite, the Quran is unlike poetry, because most poetry is very hollow. The Quran is a book that contains and possesses that linguistic merit, and it also contains wisdom and admonishment. It teaches you how to live, how to conduct yourself in this life. In fact, when you look at those who accuse the Prophet, a non-Muslim believes that the Quran is the words of Muhammad ibn Abdullah. If someone doesn't believe that the Quran is the word of God, they're automatically going to say what? That the Quran is the words of Muhammad. What's interesting is that over the past several years, researchers have conducted stylometric analyses of the Quran. Now, stylometry is basically a statistical tool that is used to determine and to discriminate between two different speakers and authors. So what happens is, if you bring forward two writings, two books, and if you want to determine if it's the same author or if it's different authors, they do what is called a stylometric analysis. You see, human beings usually use very similar vocabulary. So for example, you bring two books. If you want to determine if both books belong to the same author, they'll look at the word usage. If there is a lot of overlap in terms of vocabulary usage, the conclusion is what? That both books are authored by the same person. Because individuals have a very similar style, they typically use similar vocabulary. Scholars, what they did is they took the Quran and they looked at the Hadith to see if there is a lot of similarity between the Quran and the Hadith. What they found was that 62% of the words and the vocabulary that is in the Quran is not found in the Ahadith of the Prophet. And 80% of the words and the vocabulary terms that are used in Ahadith are not found in the Quran. So researchers say that it is statistically impossible for a human being to self-police themselves and separate these two categories of words. Meaning that if the Quran was indeed authored by Muhammad ibn Abdullah, we would see more common vocabulary words between the Quran and the Ahadith. But this drastic difference in word usage highlights that the Quran has a different author. The Quran has a different author. So, in these short words, Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was able to demonstrate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His wisdom, He gave every prophet a miracle that was suitable for their time. Now, Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was not only a guide for the Shias. Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was also a guide for tyrants. You know, it is narrated that one night when Imam al-Hadi was in Samarra, he was apprehended by al-Mutawakkil al-Abbasi. Mutawakkil was always suspicious that Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was organizing an underground movement to overthrow him. So in the middle of the night, he sent his officers to raid the house of Imam al-Hadi. And they did. And they found the Imam in the middle of the night engaged in worship. They ended up bringing him to the palace of Mutawakkil. That night, Mutawakkil was drinking. He had a gathering in his palace, drinking, and there was music and dancing. And he brings Imam al-Hadi into that majlis. You can only imagine how insulting that must have been for someone like Imam al-Hadi, the Imam, this man of purity and piety, to be brought into such a gathering. Mutawakkil, he seats Imam al-Hadi beside him. And he says to Imam al-Hadi, he takes a cup of wine and he offers it to Imam al-Hadi. He says, drink. Imam Ali ibn Muhammad alayhi salam, he says, I swear by Allah that this has never mixed with my blood and my flesh. So he says, pardon me from drinking an intoxicant. Mutawakkil, he then says, he wants to humiliate the Imam. He says, I want you to recite some poetry for me. The Imam alayhi salam, he says, I'm not a poet. I don't recite poetry. Mutawakkil says, I insist that you recite. Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, on the spot, this was not a poem that he sat down and spent hours writing. This was an impromptu poem that Imam al-Hadi composed in the presence of Mutawakkil. This man who was intoxicated by not just the wine, but by his own power and wealth. And the Imam recites a poem that I think is a potent reminder to not just Mutawakkil, but to the Mutawakkils of our time as well. The tyrants and the oppressors of this time. What does the Imam say? I'll read the Arabic and there's a translation that actually rhymes similar to the way that the Arabic rhymes. You know, sometimes you translate words verbatim, and sometimes you might compromise a little bit on the accuracy of the translation to preserve the rhythm of the poem. And this interaction is mentioned by al-Mas'udi, a Sunni historian, in his book Muruj al-Dhahab. The Imam alayhi salam, he says, باتوا على قلل الأجبال تحرسهم غلب الرجال فما أغنتهم القلل. He says, they camp on the peaks of mountains surveilled by hardened men, yet their guards won't avail. واستنزلوا بعد عز عن معاقلهم وأودعوا حفرا يا بئس ما نزلوا. Debased after pomp for their lofty stations, and into their pits, what pitied destinations. ناداهم صارخ بعدما قبروا أين الأسرة والتيجان والحلل. A shouter does call them while they lie in graves. Where are the beds, the crowns, and the lavish displays? أين الوجوه التي كانت منعمة من دونها تضرب الأستار والكلل. Where are the faces well caked in their glamour that once took curtains and garlands as armor? فأفصح القبر عنهم حين سألهم تلك الوجوه عليها الدود يقتتل. The answer emerges from deep in their caskets. Now those dear faces are grub for the maggots. قد طالما أكلوا دهرا وما شربوا فأصبحوا بعد طول الأكل قد أكلوا. How long it had been that they ate and drank endlessly. Having eaten so long, now they are the specialty. وطالما عمروا دورا لتحصنهم ففارقوا الدور والأهلين وارتحلوا. How long they had furnished their homes for protection, only to leave them for lands of dejection. وطالما كنزوا الأموال وادخروا فخلفوها على الأعداء انتقلوا. How long they had treasured their wealth and did store, they leave it for rivals and move to the fore. Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, after reciting these lines of poetry, Mutawakkil was not expecting a poem like this, a poem that would be a reality check. Mutawakkil bursts into tears. What's amazing, brothers and sisters, is that Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam was not only a guide for the Shia, he was a warner for the oppressors, and he is that Imam who preserved the Ziyarat of Imam al-Hussein. Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, during his time, the Shias were afraid to go to Karbala because of the dangers of making that trip. The Imam alayhi salam, one of the things that he does is that when he was sick, one of his companions by the name of Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, he comes to the Imam alayhi salam and he says, دخلت على أبي الحسن علي بن محمد وهو محموم عليل. He says, I came to Imam al-Hadi in Samarra and he was ill. He was bedridden. He was unable to stand. He was sick. فقال لي يا أبا هاشم ابعث رجلا من موالينا إلى الحائر. Imam al-Hadi, he says to Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, go find someone from among our Shia so he can go to Karbala to make dua for my shifa. يدعو الله لي فخرجت من عندي فاستقبلني علي بن بلال. Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, he says, I went out and I saw Ali ibn Bilal and I said to him, Ali ibn Muhammad al-Hadi wants someone to go to Karbala to make dua for his speedy recovery. The man, he says that why doesn't Imam al-Hadi make dua for himself? He's an Imam. His dua is mustajab. His dua for himself is better than my dua for him in Karbala. Abu Hashim al-Ja'fari, he goes back to Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam. And Imam al-Hadi, what does he say? He says, كان رسول الله أفضل من البيت والحجر. Imam al-Hadi says, Rasulullah is better than the Kaaba. Rasulullah is better than Hajar al-Aswad. He says, وَكَانَ يَطُوفُ بِالْبَيْتِ وَيَسْتَلِمَ الْحَجَرِ. Even though the Prophet is better than Kaaba and Hajar al-Aswad, the Prophet would go to Mecca. He would do tawaf around the Kaaba. He would extend his hand to Hajar al-Aswad. Why? He says, وَإِنَّ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى بُقَاعًا يُحِبُّ أَن يُدْعَى فِيهَا فَيَسْتَجِيبُ لِمَنْ دَعَى. Imam al-Hadi says Allah has certain places that He loves to be supplicated at. And He says, وَالْحَائِرُ مِنْهَا. And Karbala is one of those places. Karbala is one of those places where Allah loves it when His abd raises his hands in dua. For those of you who go to Karbala, you see a lot of poetry inscribed in the haram of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. But there's one poet that I'd like to mention and we'll conclude the majlis. There was a Nasibi by the name of Jamaluddin Ali ibn Abdul Aziz al-Musili al-Hilli. This man was a Nasibi. He was born of two parents who were Nasibis, who had enmity towards the family of the Prophet. He says that my mother, before I was born, she made a nadhr. She made a vow. She had all daughters. She said, "Oh Allah, if you grant me a son, I will send him during the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein to attack the Shia and slaughter them for wanting to go and commit shirk in Karbala." She made this nadhr, that if Allah grants her a son, she will devote him to the killing of the Shia, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave her a son, this is Jamaluddin. When he grew up, when he became baligh, she said to him that, "Oh my son, before you were born, I made a nadhr that I would send you towards Karbala and you would block and slaughter those Rafidis who want to go and commit shirk in Karbala." So he was 16, 17 years old. She sent him. He goes, he was from Mosul. He camped out at one of the roads where the Zuwar from Jabal Amil would come, from South Lebanon. So he stood there. He camped out there waiting for the caravans. This was 1100 years ago. This is a true story. This man, he died in 580 after the Hijrah, but 1100 years ago. He says, "I was waiting for the Zuwar to pass so I can loot them and I can ransack their caravan and slaughter them." He says, "It was a long journey and I was tired and I fell asleep." He says, "When I fell asleep on the side of the road, waiting for the Shias to go and visit Imam al-Hussein," he said, "in my dream I saw that it was the Day of Judgment. And the decision was made for me to be taken to Jahannam." He said, "The angels dragged me, and as I was being thrown into the hellfire, I noticed that the flames of Jahannam were not burning me. So I asked, I'm in hell, but the flames are not touching me. Why is that? Why do I feel that I have a protective shield that is blocking the flames?" And it was said to him, "Because sprinkled on your body is the dust from that caravan of the Zuwar of Hussein." He woke up from the dream at the side of the road. He thinks to himself that I've come here to kill the Zuwar of Hussein. Look at how Allah has honored the Zuwar of Imam al-Hussein on the Day of Judgment. So when he stood up, when he woke up from his dream, he went towards Karbala. And he composed a poem that you can find in the Sahan of Imam al-Hussein today. And his poem is what? It's a long poem, but I'll just recite to you the first couple lines. He says, إذا شئت النجاة فزر حسينا. He says, if you want salvation, visit Hussein. إذا شئت النجاة فزر حسينا كي تلقى الإله قرير عيني. If you want salvation, visit Hussein, so you meet Allah on the Day of Judgment with gladdened eyes. فإن النار ليس تمس جسما عليه غبار زوار الحسين. He says, if you want salvation, visit Hussein. For when you meet your Lord, your eyes will be gladdened. And surely the fire does not touch that body that has upon it the dust from the feet of the visitors of Hussein. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us and bless us and illuminate our hearts with the teachings of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin.
Matam Hussein.
الثوار
وقت جب کہ زینب دربار میں گئی تھی، قاری نمازیوں سے محفل سجی ہوئی تھی، ظالم یہ پوچھتا تھا غازی تیرا کہاں ہے، بالوں سے منہ چھپائے زینب یہ کہہ رہی تھی، اے میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر چھپاؤں کہاں، اے میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر چھپاؤں کہاں، مجمع عام میں بے وطن بے امان آ گیا کارواں، اے میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر چھپاؤں کہاں، میں بھی ہوں مرضیہ بنت خیر النساء، میرے لہجے میں ہے بابا تیری ادا، نام زینب میرا تو نے جو رکھ دیا، دے دی اپنی زبان، میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر چھپاؤں، بابا جان میرے دا مانگتی رہ گئی، بام و در سج گئے جیتے جی مر گئی، حلقہ شام میں نام سن کر میرا مر گیا ناتوان، میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر چھپاؤں کہاں، ہاتھ کانوں پہ ہے نیل گالوں پہ ہے، اور نشان جو سکینہ کی شانوں پہ ہے، ہر نشان سے یہی آ رہی ہے صدا، بابا جان میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر چھپاؤں، بابا جان یہ تیرا آخری تھا بیان، تیری چادر بچا اے غازی جوان، مر گیا با وفا چن گئی ہے ردا، کہتی ہے بیبیاں اے میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، سر چھپاؤں کہاں، ایسا خطبہ دیا میں نے دربار میں، لکھ رہا ہے جو یاور تیرے پیار میں، لہجۂ حیدری ہر اذان کے لیے ہے صدائے اذان، میرے بابا جان ہو رہی ہے اذان، छुपाऊं कहाँ या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन
Brother Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
زيارة. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتمع، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر الأحد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي. السلام عليك يا مولاي صاحب الزمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان، السلام عليك يا إمامي وإمام الإنس والجان، أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك ورحمة الله وبركاته.